to share in Tegan's presentation. Maybe God will inspire one of those little boys and girls to, well, obviously serve wherever the Lord would bring them, every single one of them, but maybe one of them in another land as well. If you want to follow along, I encourage you to take your Bible. The text we're going to be looking at primarily this morning is found in 1 Corinthians chapter 6. And I'll read from verses 12 through 20. First Corinthians chapter 6, starting at verse 12. Paul begins here by quoting something that he hears the people in Corinth to say. I have the right to do anything, you say, but not everything is beneficial. I have the right to do anything, you say, but I will not be mastered by anything. You say, food for the stomach and the stomach for food, and God will destroy them both. The body, however, is not meant for sexual immorality, but for the Lord, and the Lord for the body. By his power, God raised the Lord from the dead, and he will raise us also. Do you not know that your bodies are members of Christ himself? Shall I then take the members of Christ and unite them with a prostitute? Never. Do you not know that he who unites himself with a prostitute is one with her in body? For it is said, and here he quotes Genesis 2, the two will become one flesh. But whoever is united with the Lord is one with him in spirit. Flee from sexual immorality. All other sins a person commits are outside the body, but whoever sexually sins against their own body. Do you not know that your bodies are temples of the Holy Spirit, who is in you, whom you have received from God? You are not your own. You were bought at a price. Therefore, honor God with your bodies. When you were young, when all of us were young, we got the question many times, what do you want to be when you grow up, little boy? What do you want to be when you grow up, little girl? And it was always something special, right? Astronaut or football player or whatever. I remember thinking, when I grow up, I want to have Philip Pritchard's job. You probably don't know who Philip Pritchard is. This is a picture of Philip Pritchard. Do you want to throw that picture up there? Philip Pritchard is the guy on the right. The guy, do you know the person on the left? Do you know what's on the left? If you don't know what that is, you turn in your Canadian passport, right? Because you're a fake. That's Lord Stanley, right? Okay, so Philip Pritchard, since 1987, has been the keeper of the Stanley Cup. Okay? His job is to care for the cup. Wherever the Stanley Cup goes, Philip Pritchard goes. Okay? He's been to over 40 countries with the cup, and that's why you see him sitting on a plane. You'll notice that you can't see it at the bottom. The cup is nicely, firmly strapped in with a seatbelt. He's been to over 40 countries with the cup. Anytime it's publicly displayed and people can come, I've been, I can't remember where it was Grand Forks, North Dakota, the World Junior Hockey Championships. I don't know how many years ago. The Stanley Cup was there, and I remember standing in line and having my moment with the cup, right? And Philip Pritchard is never more than 15 feet away from the Stanley Cup, right? Because it's his job to keep this object safe and clean and in good condition, because it's a very precious item. That cup means a lot to so many people, and that's what makes it precious, and that's what makes his job precious, because of what that thing he has been entrusted with means to so many people. So I wanted to have his job. The unfortunate thing is there's only one of that job in the world, so it's probably not going to happen. But I imagine he enjoys his job, right? I imagine he thinks it's important because what he has is important to others. So he gets to see every day the smiles on people's faces. He would have seen little Rusty Hildebrand smile and joy as he beheld the Stanley Cup. And that becomes his joy. And he gets to see the smiles and the pleasure it brings people. That's an awesome job. So what I want to suggest to you this morning, and I know that we're running a little bit later, so I'm going to try to get my point across as succinctly as possible here this morning. But I have an important message for you, okay? I want to tell you all this morning that you have a job that is much more precious than Philip Pritchard's job, okay? Every single one of you. Because I want to tell you this morning that every single one of you have been entrusted with many things by someone who is far more precious than the one who entrusted Philip Pritchard with the cup. Right? God has entrusted you with many things. And every day, I don't know if you think of it this way, but every day you get to bring pleasure to the God of the universe with how you care for what he has entrusted to you. Every day you get to bring pleasure to God. And you get to enjoy his pleasure as you handle that which has been entrusted to you by him. You get to, as he is pleased, you get to enjoy the master's happiness with him. So the key word over these next few weeks is this big word on the screen right behind me. It's the word that we unpacked last week. It's the word entrusted. Entrusted. And we're going to keep talking about this word over the next number of weeks. Entrusted. Last week we said that everything that you have, everything that's in your possession, whether it be physical, whether it be relational, everything you have, whether it be a position, everything you have has been entrusted to you by God. It's not yours by right. It's something you have received from God as he has entrusted it to you. Now that's not the common way of thinking about most things that are in our care. In our homes, our time, our money, or whatever, our jobs. That's not the normal way of thinking. We normally think with an owner mentality. We talked about that last week, an owner mentality which says, it's mine, therefore I'm responsible for it, but I'm not accountable for it to anybody. That's what it means to be an owner, right? But we are not owners, God tells us. The Bible makes clear to us. We are owners of nothing. We are only stewards. We are stewards of everything. And so we talked last Sunday about the principle of stewardship. And again this Sunday, if you haven't already seen it on the back, if you want to track along, if you want to fill in some blank, if that's your sort of thing, on the back of the bulletin, there's some sermon notes. And there's also some questions I encourage you to reflect on, to discuss at some point, maybe later. But it says there, the principle of stewardship. What is stewardship? It's a mentality that says, it is not mine, it is God's. But I am responsible for it because he entrusted it to me. And I am accountable for it because its purpose is for his glory. So that's supposed to be our mentality about everything. It's not mine, it's God's. And I'm responsible for it because he entrusted it to me. And I am accountable for it to him because its purpose is for his glory. Okay, so everything you have falls into that category. And so what we're doing over these few weeks is we're just going to look at what does stewardship look like in different areas of life. We're going to break that down a little bit. Last Sunday, I gave you a question, which I'm sure you all went home and did. The first question was, list everything in your life of which you are a steward. Because my guess was that there are things in your life that you are handling, not with a stewardship mentality, that you haven't thought of it in the terms of God entrusting it to you. I don't know if any of you did that. I'm not going to ask because I'm always disappointed. But at prayer meeting, I followed up and I asked them, okay, guys, have any of you thought of this? Tell me, what are you stewards of? Let's make a list. Let's talk about this. And those of you that were at the prayer meeting, you offered some things, everything right, of course. Nobody mentioned what we're going to talk about today. Because I would suggest what we're going to talk about today maybe is the last thing we think of as an entrustment from God. It's our body. Your body. We are stewards. We have been entrusted with our body. Now, if this doesn't apply to you this morning, feel free to stand up and leave. But you can't do that, can you? Right? See, that was clever. It'll hit you at some point. Trust me. No, it won't. Okay. Everybody in this room has a body. That's not rocket science. You've all been entrusted with a body, so everybody listen up. This is the very first thing God gave you. The very first thing he entrusted with you. You've heard people say, we came into this life with nothing, we can take nothing out of this life. It's a nice way of saying, don't hold too tightly onto anything because you can't take it with you. But it's not really true that we brought nothing into this life. We brought into this life a body. A naked body, but a body. And if it's easy to think of ourselves as an owner in this area because we don't remember a time without it. There wasn't a time without it. It's always been yours. You've always had it. And so I think in this area, it's easy for us to not understand that this body has been given to me by God, and I'm a steward of it, and I'm accountable for what I do with it and how I use it. The church in Corinth thought of the body not as a steward of God, but as owners. They had an owner mentality around the body, I think, because in Paul's two letters to the Corinthians, 1 Corinthians and 2 Corinthians, the human body seems to be a theme throughout both of these books. Now, Corinth was a city that was at the epicenter of Greek culture. Even today, Corinth is in present-day Greece. It's very close to Athens. In Paul's day, it was one of the principal cities of the Roman Empire. It was a center of Greek culture, a center of Greek, philosophy. And so the Corinthian Christians were steeped in their culture and what their culture would have thought about the spirit and about the body. And all of that seemed to shape how they understood their relationship with their body in ways that weren't consistent with what God says. Paul begins by quoting them here in verse 12 at the beginning of our text when he says, I have the right to do anything you say. This must have been kind of one of their favorite sayings because in chapter 10 he says it again. So he knew that this is something the Christians in Corinth say when it comes to pretty much everything but their body, here in this case. I have the right to do anything. Now, when you use words like right or authority, those are not the words of stewardship, right? A steward doesn't use the word right in a total sense. He can't. That's a word that owners use. And so these Corinthian Christians had an ownership mentality about the body. I have a right to do anything, they say. And the Corinthians had a dualistic mindset, which came from Greek culture, the Greek philosophy around them. Dualism, maybe some of you have heard about this if you took like Philosophy 101 in high school or college or whatever. Or if you're just one of those geeks who likes to read. Dualism is to believe that the spirit and the mind, they don't really make a distinction there, okay, the spirit. Dualism is to believe that the spirit and the body, the physical body, are radically different kinds of things that have nothing to do with one another. And typically, they believe that the spirit was important, the spirit was significant and eternal, and the body was inconsequential. It was unimportant. It was not significant. It was, as Paul said, they said, it was destined to be destroyed. At some point, you're just going to shed it like a butterfly shedding its cocoon, and the butterfly emerges, right? And the cocoon doesn't really matter. So that was that's dualism, to think that there's a big difference between the spirit and the body, and they have nothing to do with one another. The spirit is eternal, the spirit's important, the body's temporary, it's not important. The spirit is good, the spirit is noble, the body is bad, it's evil. And so one of the things that the Corinthians were known for saying is food for the stomach and the stomach for food, and God will destroy them both. In other words, they had the mindset, it doesn't matter. God's going to destroy it. It doesn't matter. God doesn't care about the body. To dualists, like those in the Corinthians church, the body is destined for destruction, so it has no lasting or, eternal significance whatsoever. Now that might sound kind of technical and distant from us, but I want to suggest to you it's not. Because as Christians, we talk a lot about the soul. We talk a lot about the spirit, so we should, but we don't very often talk about the body, do we? Unbeknownst to us, we tend to fit into that kind of dualistic way of thinking too in our own lives, in our own faith. We talk about how Jesus came to save souls. Well, yes, he didn't just come to save souls. He came to save you, soul and body. Right? But we say Jesus came to save our souls. We tend to think of heaven as spiritual and earth as physical, right? Heaven, it's wings and floating in clouds, and earth is physical. That's not the biblical picture. We tend to think of our bodies like, have you ever seen a rocket launch? Right? Where they send a rocket or a satellite into orbit, and how do they get it into orbit? Well, it's got these big fuel tanks attached to it, and you've seen the launch, right? It gets launched, and you see the big flames coming out of the two fuel tanks, and you see it, and the camera zooms in, and it's getting higher up into the orbit, and then what happens? Once it gets high enough that it's kind of in an orbit, it doesn't need those fuel packs anymore. I guess someone presses a button, and they unhatch, and then they fall away. You know what I'm talking about? Those two, they kind of fall away from the rocket, and then you see them burn up in the atmosphere. And then the rocket, the important thing, keeps going, and it's in orbit now. We tend to think that way about the soul. The soul is that, and the body is a heavenly delivery system. That's what the body is. It's just a heavenly delivery system that gets us there, and then unnecessary, and the spirit is where it's at its destination, and it keeps going. I want to suggest to you that's not just all like head stuff. Like that matters with how we live, how we think about the relationship between our body and God, our body and our spirit. That sort of attitude towards the bodies leads typically people to do one of two things, either to neglect their body or to indulge their body. And Christians over the centuries, just as people outside the church have typically done one or the other, Christians, if they haven't understood this right, if they've had that dualistic mindset, they've tended to do one or the other. Either to neglect it or to indulge it. And so you've heard about these crazy priests or monks who went and they slept on beds of nails because God doesn't, God and comfort don't go together. Pain is spiritual. Got to beat the body into submission. Pain. And some of them stood on the top of poles, and they lived very austere lives, and they didn't eat yummy food with spices. They ate gruel that didn't taste good. I think my Mennonite forefathers fit into that category. I don't think they ever met a spice. And they built churches with hard wooden pews because you should be uncomfortable and you should experience some discomfort and pain when you come to church. That would be spiritual. Right? To neglect and to deny the appetites of the body. And so even in the early church, people thought the appetites of the body were to be resisted. Not properly used, but resisted. That's why they said people shouldn't marry. Everybody should be chaste. Sex is bad. And so many held marriage in low esteem because of that. Deny the sexual appetite. And so their response was to neglect the body, to deny the body. Because spirit good, body has nothing to do with God. So avoid it. The other side was to indulge the body. And whether it's neglect or indulge, it has the same root cause. Okay, it's one or the other. They're opposite of one another, but it has the same root cause, which is this sort of mentality. And this was the way that the Corinthians swung. They said, if God is just interested in the spirit, if God just came to save my soul, if it just matters what I believe, how I relate to God, then the body's not important, then follow, do whatever you want. It doesn't matter. Indulge all the impulses of the body. It doesn't matter what you do. And so these people took that attitude. So it resulted in gluttony with food. It resulted in sexual immorality, just following the impulse of the body. Okay? They sought to seek, they sought to fulfill every impulse or desire of their body, to indulge it without restraint. Paul makes a case here for why the body and what we do with it matters to God, and therefore should matter to us as well. You know, this text is kind of about sexual immorality, but you might be happy to know that we're really just talking more broadly about the body here and how we relate to the body, because there's some principles in here that help us understand how God views the body and how we should relate to the body. What these verses tell us is essentially three things about why the body matters to God and should matter to us. First of all, God made it. You know that. Right back at the beginning, it was his intent, and the body was his design. And he called it very good. And God made them to be in body forever. Right? That there would be no death. And so David says in Psalm 139, "You knit me together in my mother's womb. I am fearfully and wonderfully made." God knit me together in body as well as in spirit. God made us whole, body and spirit together is what it means to be human. Body and spirit. That's the way God made us. That was his intent. That was his design. And it wasn't a temporary state. It was to be a permanent state of being, body and spirit. And so Paul says in verse 13, he says, the body, however, is not meant for sexual immorality, but for the Lord, and the Lord for the body. Hear that? The body is for the Lord, and the Lord is for the body. God made the body and the needs of the body and the appetites of the body for us to relate to him. So they said food for the stomach, stomach for the food. Body and sexual release in the body. They're made for one another. And he says, no. He says, the body is made for the Lord, and the Lord for the body. All the workings of the body, all the appetites of the body, properly met, are ultimately about our enjoyment of God. That's what he said. So God made it. God made your body. Secondly, God redeemed them. If you're taking notes, that would be in there. God redeemed them. He says in verse 14, by his power God raised the Lord from the dead, and he will raise us also. In verse 20 it says, you are not your own, you were bought at a price. So Paul essentially says, if Jesus was raised and given a new body, then so are we. This is the promise of God to us, that not only are our souls redeemed, but Jesus died to redeem your body. And he paid the highest price. He says, your body was bought at a price. What price was your body bought for? The body of Jesus Christ, right? The body of the Son of God was the price. Can you think of a price higher than that? Higher than the life of the Son of God? No. Is the body important to God? Absolutely. He gave his own life to redeem it, Paul says. And so the vision we have of the future at the end of the Bible, Revelation 21, is the new heaven and the new earth and resurrection. And this makes me happy. This body, I like my body. Maybe not everything about it. I would have given myself a little bigger ears. Maybe a longer face. But that was God's call. But I love being in body. And the promise of God is there's a day coming for all who trust in Jesus Christ, who've been redeemed by him, that just as Jesus rose from the dead with a perfect, glorified body, so you too will rise from the dead and be given a transformed formed body, and you will live eternally in the presence of God, body and soul together, just like God always intended from the beginning. That's the picture, a new heaven and a new earth. Not destruction, but restoration. God redeemed your body. Thirdly, God lives in them, Paul says. Just a very simple point. He says in verse 19, don't you know that your bodies are temples of the Holy Spirit, who is in you, whom you have received from God? He said, God thinks so much about the body, the human body, that he even places his Holy Spirit to dwell in your body as its home, which makes it holy. Holy ground, a temple. Do you think of your body as a temple of the presence of God? If you've been redeemed, then that's what it is. So Paul goes through this. God made your body. God redeemed your body. God lives in your body by the presence of the Holy Spirit. Doesn't that suggest that it matters to God what you do with your body? If God made, redeemed, and dwells in your body, then Paul is making the case we must treat our bodies as valuable, as objects, as a trust from God for the purpose of, like everything else, honoring him, bringing him glory. And so Paul says in Romans 12:1, therefore, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, offer your bodies as living sacrifices, holy and pleasing to God, for this is your spiritual act of worship. Right? Offer your bodies, for this is your spiritual act of worship. So he says, don't separate the two. It is a spiritual act of worship to offer God your body. Don't separate the two, he says. So let's just, in the last couple of minutes, just get a little more practical here. What I hear him saying is that healthy living is an act of worship. Healthy living, how I care for my body, has everything to do with God and his glory. It is an act of worship. A German guy by the name of Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, which, if you've got that name, you're going to say smart stuff. Guaranteed. Guaranteed. Johann Wolfgang von Goethe said, take care of your body with steadfast fidelity. The soul must see through these eyes alone, and if they are dim, the whole world is clouded. So let me read that again. Take care of your body with steadfast fidelity, faithfulness. The soul must see through these eyes alone, and if they are dim, the whole world is clouded. It's just a fancy way of making a very simple point, right? The body and the spirit, he says, are interwoven. The spirit and the body are one. Right? One affects the other. The spirit affects the body, and the body affects the spirit. He essentially says, if your body's dead, your spirit ain't good for nothing on this earth. There is no spirit apart from the body here. Healthy living, then, is an act of worship, of bringing honor to God. So what does that look like in your life? Okay? What does it look like with sleep? What that means is my alertness and my energy level is related to how I sleep, how I rest. Now I'm preaching to myself here, because Rusty has a bad habit of going to bed too late. It's just too late. I waste time watching sports scores, surfing the net, whatever. But it's too late. And then I wake up too tired. And I say, man, I would just love to have that sort of life where I could set the alarm at 6:30. Some of you are laughing because you've already been at work for an hour by 6:30. And I could get up and I could make a pot of coffee and it would be so easy for me to spend time with God. And I would, you idiot, Rusty, why are you going to bed at 12:30 at night? Your body affects your spirit. If you're not alert and if you don't have energy, you're of no good to God. So sleep to the glory of God. My strength and my stamina in my body are related to my eating and my fitness, right? I read that recently that 75%, I mean, studies say everything under the sun, but it said 75% of cancer results from lifestyle choices. This is the most recent thing. Okay. Now, if God, in his great plan, chooses that you die in a car accident or you come down with cancer, and that robs you of your health and maybe even robs you of your life, that's in the hands of God. That's the sovereignty, that's the providence of God. Many issues of illness and health and fitness are outside of our control. But many issues aren't, are they? How we care for our body, how we eat, how we keep our body fit and strong and exercise, those things are entirely a matter of choice. And my strength and my stamina, in order to do the work of God, to be ready for whatever God has for me tomorrow and the next day, is related to my strength and my stamina, is related to how I eat, is related to my fitness. How you eat and how you exercise are all about God. You know, some people treat their car really well. I don't tend to be one of those people, but smart people treat their car well, and they change the oil when it's supposed to be changed, and they change the tires when it's supposed to be changed, and to get the most out of that car so that it will last as long as possible before they have to get another one. You know, how much more then should we have that attitude with our body? Because you only get one. You only get one. There's no replacing. How much more should we care for our body so that we are better available to God to serve him, whatever that looks like in our life? So they said, I have the right to do anything. But he said, well, but not everything is beneficial. A steward doesn't say, I have the right. A steward says, what is beneficial? What is beneficial? What's going to maximize the glory and the honor of God? That's what I'm interested in. I'm not interested in my rights. What is beneficial? That's the question, he says, for glorifying God. He also says, you guys say, I have the right to do anything, but he says to you, you should say, I will not be mastered by anything. You might say, I have the right to do it, but in reality, it's got you. You don't have it. And so I know for some people in this room, there are addictions, there are physical addictions that affect your body negatively. That it becomes abuse of the body, whether it be smoking cigarettes. And now don't go and say the Baptist preacher preached a sermon about how it's evil to smoke cigarettes. That's not what this is about. I remember Kenny McClelland, God bless his soul, been around the presence of God, I don't know how many years now. He was the first guy baptized. He was an elderly man already by that point, and he had been baptized for all those years because he smoked. Not acceptable to God. I say, you're crazy, Ken. Get baptized. Nobody deserves it. God is gracious, but a steward, it doesn't accept it. A steward doesn't accept being mastered by anything, but they strive to be mastered only by God, right? So that their bodies are available completely to God. So my question to you, have you thought of yourself as a steward of your body? How can you better steward your body? Those are some of the questions on the back of your sheet. Have you thought of yourself as a steward of your body? And either way, how can you better steward it? A steward recognizes the high value of the body, but just in my last thing I want to say here, because a steward recognizes the high value of the body, which is what I've just said, but also recognizes that the body doesn't have the highest value. Right? It's not the thing of low worth. You're not supposed to hold it in low esteem, but you're not supposed to hold it in the highest esteem either. Because that's not what a steward does. Because the most important thing to a steward is not the thing, but the one who gave the thing, correct? And sometimes I got to give up the thing in order to honor the one who gave the thing. So a steward, a Christian, doesn't hold the body in the highest value, because just as you can make too little of it, you can make too much of it. You can make too much of your body, and you can worship your health, and you can worship your physique, and you can worship your fitness, and instead of it being a temple for God to be honored, it becomes the God itself. Health then becomes the goal instead of the means by which we honor God, which is the goal. That's motivated by fear of death, fear of sickness, fear of your appearance, fear of discomfort, satisfaction in your health, whatever it might be. Not necessarily bad things, but not things of the highest value, which is to honor God. At times, honoring God means sacrificing your body. At times, honoring God means having a bad night's sleep. Because so-and-so calls, or so-and-so needs me. And I'm going to pay for this tomorrow. I know I will. But in this moment, honoring God means a bad night's sleep. Or whatever. A steward is willing to do what he needs to do with his body to honor God. That's the whole point. Now, Jesus was the perfect steward. Right? There he is in the Garden of Gethsemane, on his knees. He knows what's coming. He knows the pain. He knows the anguish of the cross. And he's praying to his Father, and he says to his Father, Father, not my will, but your will be done. Lord, you know I don't want the pain. You know I don't want to be hung on a cross. Yeah, I don't want any of that. I want life. I want comfort. I want health. But he says, but not my life, or not my will, but yours be done. But more than any of that, I want your honor. I want your glory. So your will be done. And so Jesus accepted pain and death in his body for us. He honored God with his body by not clinging to it. He was a perfect steward of his body for us, because we aren't perfect stewards. We all fail, but he has been successful where we have failed on our behalf, so that by trusting in him, we are forgiven by God. We are made righteous. He honored God with his body, not by clinging to it. So a steward doesn't make too little of it, and it doesn't make too much of it, but uses it always to honor and to glorify God. In other words, how we treat our bodies is a question of stewardship, even before it's a question of health. I want to eat right now, and I want to exercise so that I don't have to gasp for air when I go up the stairs. That's good, but it's more than that. It's greater than that. I want to be in good fitness as much as I can be, so that I'm ready for what God has for me. How we treat our bodies is a question of stewardship before it's a question of health. Being a good and faithful steward of God requires you to be a good and faithful steward of your body. Making a commitment to honor God with your body is really making a commitment to live a healthier lifestyle. And if you think I should have been preaching about more important things, then you're a dualist. How I want to end our service here before we break for coffee and fellowship is we normally end kind of with a prayer and one last song. We're going to sing I Surrender All. But what I'd like you to do is we'll stand as we sing. And if, as I've been speaking, if the Lord has been showing you something in your life for which you have not been a good steward in the area of your body, maybe it's something that's mastering you, or just something that you know is limiting you, is limiting your ability to honor God, and you want to just give that to God and seek his help in that area. As we're singing, I just invite you to come and just to stand here in the front as we're all standing and singing, but just to come to the front. If the Lord has laid something like that on your heart, brought that to your mind, and then after we've finished singing I Surrender All, I'll just have a prayer over you and over the rest of us, and then we'll break for some fellowship and coffee. Would you stand?